Chapter 43. Search. While looking at Klein, Leonard smiled and nodded. Then, do you need anything from them? He had cooperated with old Neil and company numerous times, so he naturally knew that divination required a medium, especially when the person being divined was not present. Klein thought for a moment before saying to Klee, I need some of Elliot's recent clothes which have not been washed or starched. It would be better if you have any accessories he used to wear on him. He tried to choose ordinary mediums, not something that would normally invite questions. But even so, Klee wore a look of puzzlement. Why? After his question, he added, I have a picture of young master Elliot on me. Why? Because we are divining his momentarily at a loss for an answer. Location. Klein was. If he answered truthfully, ignoring the fact that it violated the confidentiality clause, Klee would likely storm out immediately and rip apart the contract while cursing. This bunch of cheats. If that works, why don't I find the most famous spirit medium in Ottawa County? By the side, Leonard Mitchell chuckled and said, Mr. Klee, my partner, colleague rears a unique pet. Its sense of smell is sharper than a hound's. That's why we need clothes that little Elliot wore and items he used to wear on him to aid us in finding him. As you know, clues typically bring you to a general region. As for the picture, we would need it too. Both of us need to know what little Elliot looks like. Klee accepted the reason by nodding slowly. Will you be waiting here, or will you be going with me to Mr. Viceroy's residence in the city? Let's go together. It saves time, replied Klein simply. Not only was he eager to try out his abilities as a beyonder, but he also wanted to save the child. All right, the carriage is downstairs. As Klee spoke, he took out a black and white photograph and handed it to Leonard. It was a picture of Elliot Viceroy alone. He was about 10 years old with rather long hair that nearly covered his eyes. There were obvious freckles on his face, and he did not seem to stand out. Leonard glanced at it and handed it to Klein. Klein took a careful look and placed the photograph into his pocket. Then, he took his cane and put on his hat. He followed the two out of Blackthorn Security Company and boarded the carriage downstairs. The carriage's interior was rather spacious. It was lined with thick carpet and a tiny table to rest items on. As Klee was around, Klein and Leonard did not say a word. They quietly took in the experience of traversing the pooling roads in a carriage. The carriage driver is quite good. Leonard broke the silence after some time with praise and a smile. Yeah, Klein answered perfunctorily. Klee forced a smile and said, Your compliments are his honor. We will be there soon. As they were afraid of alerting the kidnappers, the carriage did not stop at the Viceroy's residence. Instead, it stopped at the side of a nearby street. Klee held an umbrella and returned along. After waiting for some time, Leonard talked to Klein again. My surmise the last time was not without a goal. I was just trying to tell you that the notebook will definitely appear again. Perhaps it might be soon. That really isn't a happy surmise. Klein used his chin to gesture towards the carriage driver outside, indicating that he did not wish to discuss sensitive topics with outsiders around. Leonard whistled and turned his head to look out the window. He saw raindrops streak across the glass, leaving behind blurry marks. It made the world outside a complete blur. After a while, Klee returned with a bag of items. Since he walked in a hurry, the edge of his trousers were soiled and his shirt front was slightly wet. These are the clothes young Master Elliot wore yesterday. This is the storm amulet he used to wear. Klein took it and glanced at it. He discovered it to be a miniature gentleman's formal suit, a small shirt, vest, bow tie, etc. And the storm amulet was made of bronze. It was carved with symbols representing gales and sea waves, but they did not trigger Klein's perception. I'll recount in detail the incidents leading up to young Master Elliot's kidnapping. Hopefully, it will let you find him easier. Klee sat down and described the nightmare that happened in the morning, hoping that the helpers he went through great trouble to hire would be of help. Klein and Leonard held no interest in the specifics. All they cared about was the number of kidnappers, if anything unusual had happened, or if they had any weapons. 3. Normal, armed with firearms. After obtaining the desired information, they bade Klee farewell and hired a two-wheeled light carriage. Unlike public carriages, private hire carriages were either four-wheeled or two-wheeled. They were charged either by time or distance. The latter was at 4 pence a kilometer in the city and 8 pence a kilometer outside. The former cost 2 soldi per hour or part thereof. After the first hour, there were additional charges of 6 pence every 15 minutes. In inclement weather, or if the customer needed to go faster, the fare could even be higher. Klein had heard from Azek that in the capital, Backlund, these carriage drivers were famous for quoting outrageous prices. To him, taking a private carriage was quite a luxury. However, he did not need to worry about this at the moment since Leonard had tossed 2 notes to the carriage driver. Charge it by the time. After Leonard gave his instructions, he closed the carriage's door. Where are you going? The carriage driver was delighted and puzzled as he held the 2 notes. Wait a moment. Leonard cast his gaze at Klein. Klein nodded slightly and took out Elliot's clothes. He spread it out on the carriage's floor and then wound the storm amulet around his cane's handle. He held the silver-inlaid black cane and hung it straight over Elliot's clothes. He gathered the sphere of light in his head as his mind rapidly turned still. His brown eyes quickly turned deeper in color as he entered a half-cogitation state. He felt his body's spirit turning light. He vaguely saw the world of spirits everywhere. He silently said, Elliot's location. After repeating it 7 times, he released his grip of the black cane, but the cane did not fall to the ground. It remained standing in front of him even though the carriage was shaking. Minute but invisible stirrings happened around Klein, and he felt as if pairs of eyes were looking at him. Over the past few days, Klein had felt this sensation occasionally when he was in the state of cogitation or spiritual vision. With a little fear, he looked at the cane with his deep black eyes. He recited once again in his heart, Elliot's location. Elliot's location. After he finished saying that, the cane fell and pointed straight ahead. Straight. Klein held the cane and said in a deep voice. His voice sounded a little ethereal, as though it could penetrate the unknown world. This was one of the divination abilities he had grasped. It was called dowsing rod seeking. The tool of choice had to be wooden, metallic, or a mixture of both. In ordinary circumstances, he would require 2 real dowsing rods. Dowsing rods were shaped like 2 straight metal wires tapered to an edge. He would hold on to the shorter side and turn it to ascertain the correct direction. But as a seer, Klein realized that through practice, he could search for people directly using this method. He could also use his cane as a replacement for dowsing rods. The direction in which the cane fell was the direction of the item he was seeking. As for the Antigonus family's notebook, Klein could not remember it at all. Without the slightest impression, there was no way for him to find it. Go straight. Leonard instructed the carriage driver loudly. We will tell you when there's a need to turn. The carriage driver did not understand why that was necessary, but the notes in his pocket and the willingness of his passengers to hand over the money kept him quiet. He chose to follow the strange instructions. The carriage proceeded slowly, passing through one street after another. Midway, Klein used dowsing rod seeking to correct their direction. After the carriage circled a building once, he finally determined that Elliot was inside. It had only been 30 minutes since they bade Clee farewell. After sending off the cane, Klein did not continue using Elliot's clothes. Instead, he placed the cane, entwined with the storm amulet, directly onto the ground. His eyes turned dark once again as the raindrops around him suddenly spun in place. The cane fell to the front with a slant. Klein pointed at the staircase and said, There. At times, I really envy old Neil. Similarly, I envy you now. Upon seeing this scene, Leonard smiled with a sigh. Klein shot him a glance and replied with a calm tone, This is nothing difficult. If you are willing to learn, you would definitely be able to master it. Your perceptivity should be very high, right? Leonard nodded and chuckled. That's not something good. He quickened his pace and walked into the building amid the ending rain. Klein was afraid of drenching his formal suit, so he jogged in tow. The building only had 3 stories. It was similar to a unit block from Earth. The entrance to each floor was situated along the flight of stairs. There were only 2 units on per floor. Klein used dowsing rod seeking on both the first and second floors, but the cane remained still while pointing upward. The 2 of them quieted their footsteps and arrived at the 3rd floor. Klein once again placed the black cane on the floor. Whoosh! A breeze blew across the stairs as his pupils changed colors. The darkness seemed like it could suck the souls of people. Whoosh! 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 Sobs seemed to sound out around them. Klein relaxed his palm as the cane with the entwined storm amulet magically stood erect. He silently read Elliot's location again. He watched his black cane drop silently as it pointed to the right room. They should be in there. While Klein picked up his cane, he tapped his glabella twice. various colors saturated as he looked at the right room. He saw all sorts of auras inside. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 kidnappers and 1 hostage. The numbers match. One of their auras is short. It's likely Elliot. Mr. Klee said that they have 2 hunting rifles and a revolver. Klein whispered. Leonard chuckled. Let me recite a poem for them. Why be a kidnapper? Why can't you happily be civilized person? He put down the bag with Elliot's clothes and took 2 steps serene and forward. His expression melancholic suddenly turned. His magnetic and deep voice gradually sounded. Oh, the thread of horror, the hope of crimson cries. One thing at least is certain, that this life flies. One thing is certain, and the rest is lies. The flower that once has bloomed forever dies. Chapter 44, Fate. Leonard's singing sounded like a lullaby as it lightly resounded through the doors and into the winding wooden stairwell. Klein's mind immediately turned torpid. He felt like he saw a silent moonlight and serene rippling lake. His eyelids rapidly turned heavy as if he were about to fall asleep standing. Amid these indistinct sensations, he also felt a strange, formless, and indifferent focus on his back. It felt like he was wandering the spirit world himself. A baffling sense of déjà vu suffused as Klein suddenly found his train of thought once again. With his strong spiritual perception and extreme familiarity with cogitation, he barely escaped the influence of the midnight poem. However, he remained serene and could hardly evoke any emotions. Soon, Leonard stopped singing as he turned his head with a smile. I'm considering asking Captain's permission to apply for a Fainapotter lute. How can there not be an accompaniment when singing? Haha, I'm just kidding. I can hear them asleep. The black-haired, green-eyed Nighthawk with his poetic vibe took a stride forward and walked to the door that separated them from the kidnappers and hostage. He suddenly moved his shoulder and threw a punch at the door's lock. Crack! The wooden board around the lock shattered in a muffled manner. This requires precise control. Leonard turned his head and smiled. He then reached his hand into the hole and opened the door. Klein, who had regained consciousness, was not as confident as him. He reached under his armpit, drew his revolver, and turned the cylinder, making sure that he could shoot at a moment's notice. As the door swung back, he saw a man sleeping on a table with a gun by his feet. Another man was rubbing his eyes in a daze while trying to stand up. Bam! Leonard slid forward and struck the awakening kidnapper unconscious. Klein planned to enter as well when he suddenly sensed something. He turned around abruptly and faced the stairwell. Tap, tap, tap. Footsteps were approaching from below. It became clear that something was a hatless man in a brown coat circling the stairwell in his progression toward the 3rd floor while hugging a paper bag of bread. Suddenly, he stopped. He saw a gun's barrel aiming at him with a metallic luster. His pupils reflected a young man dressed in a half-top hat, black formal suit with a bow tie of the same color. It also reflected the cane which rested along the rail and the dangerous revolver. Do not move. Raise your hands. 3, 2, 1. Klein's tone was deep but relaxed. He held the revolver with both hands as he tried to imagine the man as a target from his practice. Amid the tense atmosphere, the man in the brown coat threw the bag of bread and slowly raised his hands. Is this a kind of there been sir, misunderstanding? He stared intently at the finger that Klein had placed on the trigger as he forced a smile. Joke? Has. Klein was temporarily unable to determine if he was an accomplice or a neighbor, but he did not reveal any abnormalities. He said in a deep voice, do not attempt to resist. Someone will determine if it's a misunderstanding in a while. At that moment, Leonard, who had finished handling the kidnappers, walked out and noticed the man in the stairwell. He said leisurely, so the kidnappers have another accomplice responsible for buying and delivering food? Upon hearing this, the man's pupils constricted as he suddenly raised his foot and kicked the bag of bread up in an attempt to block Klein's vision. Seemingly unaffected, Klein coldly pulled the trigger like his usual training. Bang! Blood burst out from the man's left shoulder. He tumbled to the ground and attempted to escape from the 2nd floor. However, Leonard had already reached his hand towards the handrail before leveraging himself to jump over. With a dull thud, Leonard landed on the man from above. The man fainted as Leonard swatted away some of the blood that had splattered on him. He looked up at Klein and chuckled. Nice shooting. I was trying to hit his legs. The corner of Klein's mouth twitched in an indiscernible manner as he caught a whiff of the smell of blood. He discovered that despite not having any enhancements to his visual, auditory, or tactile senses after consuming the seer potion, he could still see obstructed objects and hear faint footsteps, allowing him to take preemptive judgment. Was this in the scope of spiritual perception? Klein nodded in thought as he watched Leonard find a sharp dagger in the accomplice's possession and drag him into the room. With a gun and cane in each hand, Klein entered the kidnapper's room. They saw Elliot Vickroy jolt awake from the gunshot as he straightened his body and sat up slowly from a huddled position. Leonard had securely tied up the 3 kidnappers with the rope they used against Elliot. Bunched together, they were thrown in a corner. The lack of rope was made up by tearing their clothes. The unconscious man who had been shot in the shoulder was bandaged, but Leonard disdained getting his hands dirty, so he did not help him extract the bullet. Who are you people? Elliot stammered in pleasant delight when he saw the scene before him. Yes, you guessed right. Very precise. The genuflecting Leonard answered casually. I never expected this bastard to have some humor cells in him. Klein lowered his revolver and said to Elliot, we are mercenaries hired by your father. You can also call us security personnel. Phew, for real? Have I been saved? Elliot said joyfully, without daring to make any movements. It was apparent that he had suffered quite harshly in the short few hours of being a kidnapping victim. He did not have the kind of rashness someone his age normally would have. Leonard stood up and said to Klein, go downstairs and find some patrolling cops. Get them to inform the tobacco merchant. I do not wish to walk out with a child and 4 idiots like a kidnapper. Klein, who was wondering about the aftermath, nodded. He put away his revolver, picked up his cane, and walked to the staircase. As he went down the stairs, he had a nagging feeling that he had forgotten something. In addition, he heard Leonard say to Elliot, don't be nervous. You will soon see your father, mother, and your old butler, Clee. Why don't we play a round of Quint? Klein held back his laughter and walked out into the streets. With the help of pedestrians, he found 2 patrolling policemen. He did not use his badge and identification as a member of the Special Operations Department. Instead, he used his identity as a professional security company and recounted the happenings factually. As for him holding a gun, he was not worried at all. He had received an all-purpose weapon permit the day before yesterday. His application was accelerated by going through internal channels. The 2 policemen exchanged looks, and one of them left to gather reinforcements and inform the Vickroy family. The other policeman followed Klein to the kidnapper's room. After waiting for more than 40 minutes, Leonard signaled to Klein while the policeman was not paying attention. Klein was to sneak out of the room with him. Trust me, heading to the police station is an extreme waste of time. Let's leave first. The Nighthawk with the poetic bearing explained with a relaxed look. Since Leonard was making it clear that he would take any responsibility for any repercussions, he did not retort and followed in tow. Almost 5 minutes later, a few carriages rushed to the building where the kidnappers were. The old butler, Clee, disembarked with his portly master, Vickroy. Up to this moment in time, he was still in a daze. He found it incredulous that news would come so fast. It felt like a dream. Suddenly, he heard a crisp snap as he turned around. A 2-wheeled carriage drove past with its windows open. The black-haired and green-eyed Leonard had snapped his fingers again. After passing by Vickroy's carriage, Leonard closed the window, turned around, and looked at Klein. He extended his right hand and smiled. It was a pleasure working with you. I don't think we are on that good terms. Klein politely shook his head. He did not expect the kidnapping case to be resolved so quickly. All he could do was marvel at the capabilities of Beyonders. Even though he was just a half-assed Sequence 9 Beyonder, he was able to do many inconceivable things. This is a celebratory gesture of peace among aristocrats after a clash of swords, explained Leonard with a smile. I know. Klein had many aristocratic classmates. He looked outside the window and said with a frown, shouldn't we confirm with Mr. Clee? If he believes that the police rescued Elliot, our commission will be halved. A total of £100. There was no doubt about their providing of the kidnapper's location from their meeting from before. Don't mind it. To us, money isn't that important, said Leonard with a shrug. It's very important to me. Klein forced a polite smile and said, many poets died early from poverty. Leonard chuckled. I believe Elliot would not lie on this matter. I can tell that he still has some of his innocence left in him. However, You will not get much of the 200-pound commission either. How much would I get? Asked Klein immediately. As the unspoken rule has always been, half of the commission would be handed to Mrs. Oriana as additional funding for the team. The remaining would be split among members. A pity you aren't a formal member. You will only get about 10% of the remaining half. 10 pounds. That isn't bad either. Klein pretended to feel the pinch as he asked, "Aren't you worried that the kidnappers will realize that they were under the influence of a Beyonder's powers after they wake up? They will not suspect anything. They will only believe that the weather was good and very conducive for sleeping, leading to them dozing off. They will even believe that the song existed only in their dreams." "This is something we have verified before," answered Leonard very confidently. "Instead, it's your demon-hunting bullets that might arouse suspicion. Of course, you being a queer who enjoys mysticism would be a perfectly reasonable explanation." "I see." Klein was relieved. He just kept feeling like he had forgotten or overlooked something. After returning to Zutland Street, Klein did not wait for Klee's arrival. He strolled to Welch's place and took a different route home. On the way, he bought some beef and olives for dinner. The meal was enjoyable as always, with the same three siblings chatting idly. However, there was an additional visitor. He was a worker responsible for collecting 1 penny for the gas meter. The evening grew dark as the siblings bade each other good night and returned to their rooms. Klein was sleeping soundly when he was suddenly awoken by something familiar outside. He opened the door in puzzlement and arrived outside the bedroom that no one stayed in. He pushed open the mottled door and saw a gray desk. There was a notebook on the table, and its cover was made of hard paper. It was completely black in color. A baffling sense of déjà vu arose in him as he walked over and opened the notebook. The page he flipped open to was of a picture of someone dressed in gorgeous clothes and splendid headdress. The fool. Beneath the fool was a line in Hermes. "Everyone will die, including me." Horror gripped Klein's heart as he suddenly realized that the corner of the fool's mouth was curving up. He sat up in shock as he saw crimson moonlight penetrate his curtains. He saw his bookshelf and desk and the silhouette of his own bedroom. He realized that he had had a nightmare. As a seer, he knew what dreams typically portend. Therefore, he began to seriously search through his recollections. Klein froze up when he did because he knew what he had missed out on today. While he was immersed in Leonard's singing, he had sensed a formless and indifferent focus on his back. The feeling of being observed felt different from the usual cogitation or experience he had from using spirit vision. It gave him a sense of déjà vu. According to Captain Dunn, once a feeling of déjà vu arose in him, it probably means. Klein suddenly sat straight and confirmed the feeling. "Yes, it's that notebook. That Antigonus family's notebook." Chapter 45, Returning. The Antigonus notebook kidnappers is in the apartment across the. Although it was very coincidental, Klein believed that his intuition was correct. He immediately got out of bed and rapidly changed out of the old clothes he usually wore to bed. He picked up a white shirt beside him and draped it on, quickly buttoning from top to bottom. 1, 2, 3. He suddenly realized that he was missing buttons. The left and right sides did not seem to match. On careful look, Klein realized that he had made a mistake buttoning the first button, causing the shirt to warp. He shook his head helplessly before taking a deep breath and slowly breathing out, using some of his cogitation techniques to restore his calm. After putting on his white shirt and black trousers, he barely managed to wear his underarm holster steadily. He pulled out the revolver he hid under his soft pillow and holstered it. Without time to tie a bow tie, he draped his formal suit on, and with a hat and cane in each hand, he walked to the door. After putting on his half-top hat, Klein gently twisted the door handle and walked into the corridor. He carefully closed his bedroom's wooden door and sneaked downstairs like a thief. He used a fountain pen and paper in the living room to leave a note, informing his siblings that he had forgotten to mention that he had to be early for work today. The moment he was out the door, Klein felt a cool breeze and his entire being calmed down. The street in front of him was dark and silent without any pedestrians. Only the gas lamps illuminated the streets. Klein took out his pocket watch from his pocket and snapped it open. It was just 6 in the morning, and the crimson moonlight had not completely faded away. However, there was a hue of sunrise over the horizon. He was just about to seek out an expensive for-hire carriage when he saw a 2-horse, 4-wheeled trackless carriage approaching him. There are public carriages this early in the morning? Klein was puzzled as he went forward and waved for it to stop. "Good morning, sir." The carriage driver stopped the horses skillfully. The ticketing officer beside him had his hand to his mouth while yawning. "To Zutland Street." Klein scooped out 2 pennies from his pocket and 4 halfpence. "For pence," the ticketing officer replied without any hesitation. After paying for the ride, Klein got onto the carriage and found it empty. It exuded a clear loneliness amid the dark night. "You are the first one," said the carriage driver with a smile. The 2 brown horses widened their pace as they proceeded briskly. "To be honest, I never imagined there to be a public carriage so early in the morning." Klein sat near the carriage driver and made idle chatter to divert his attention and relax his tense mind. The carriage driver said in a self-deprecating manner, "From 6 in the morning to 9 at night, but all I earn is £1 a week." "Are there no breaks?" inquired Klein in bafflement. "We take shifts to rest once a week." The carriage driver's tone turned heavy. The ticketing officer beside him added, "We are in charge of plying the streets from 6 to 11 in the morning. Following that, we have lunch and an afternoon break. Near dinner time, which is 6 in the evening, we replace our colleagues. Even if we do not need rest, the 2 horses will need it." It wasn't anything like that in the past. There was an accident that should not have happened. Due to fatigue, a carriage driver lost control of his carriage and it toppled. It resulted in us having shifts. Those bloodsuckers would never become this kind so suddenly otherwise. The carriage driver scoffed. Under the illumination of dawn, the carriage drove towards Zutland Street and picked up 7 to 8 passengers on the way. After Klein was less tense, he did not converse further. He closed his eyes and recalled the experiences from yesterday, hoping to notice if he had forgotten anything. By the time the skies were bright when the sun was fully up, the carriage finally arrived at Zutland Street. Klein pressed his hat with his left hand and briskly jumped off the carriage. He quickly stepped into 36 Zutland Street and arrived outside Blackthorn Security Company after going up the flight of stairs. The door was still closed and had yet to open. Klein took out the ring of keys by his waist and found the corresponding brass key and inserted it into the keyhole and twisted it. He pushed forward as the door slowly opened. He saw the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell sniffing at a recently popular cigarette. "To be honest, I prefer cigars." "You seem to be in a rush," the poet-like Nighthawk asked in a relaxed and cozy manner. "Where's Captain?" Klein asked instead of answering. Leonard pointed at the partition. "He's in the office. As an advanced sleepless, he only needs 2 hours of sleep in the day. I believe it's a potion those factory owners or bankers would like the most." Klein nodded and quickly passed through the partition. He saw that Dunn Smith had opened the door to his office and he was standing at its entrance. "What's the matter?" Dressed in his black trench coat, he held a gold-inlaid cane with a solemn and stern expression. The feeling of déjà vu came to me. It should be the notebook. The Antigonus family's notebook. Klein tried hard to make his answer clear and logical. Where was that? Dunn Smith's expression did not have any obvious changes. However, Klein's intuition told him that a clear and invisible stir had happened in him. This was possibly a flash of his spirit or a change in his emotions. "It's at the place Leonard and I saved the hostage yesterday, opposite the kidnapper's room. I didn't notice it back then until I had a dream and received a revelation." Klein did not conceal anything. "Looks of, I missed out on making huge." From the contributions. Leonard, who had walked to the partition, chuckled. "It." Dunn nodded slightly as he instructed with a solemn expression. "Get Kinley to replace old Neil's watch of the armory. Let old Neil and Fry come with us." Leonard stopped acting frivolous as he immediately informed Kinley and Fry, who were in the Nighthawk's recreation room. One of them was a sleepless and the other was a corpse collector. 5 minutes later, the 2-wheeled carriage that came under the jurisdiction of the Nighthawks began driving down the sparse streets in the morning. Leonard wore a feather hat, a shirt, and a vest. He stood in as the carriage driver, lashing out a whip from time to time, sending out a crisp crack. Inside the carriage, Klein and old Neil sat on one side. Facing them were Dunn Smith and Fry. The corpse collector's skin was so white it looked like it either had not been under the sun in a very long while, or he had a severe blood deficiency. He looked to be in his 30s with black hair and blue eyes. He had a high nose bridge and his lips were very thin. He had a cold and dark demeanor and had a faint smell from often touching corpses. "Repeat the situation again in detail." Dunn adjusted the collar of his black trench coat. Klein stroked the hanging topaz in his sleeve as he began from their mission commissioning until the dream. By the side, old Neil chuckled. Your fate seems to be entwined with that Antigonus family's notebook. I never expected you to meet it in such a manner. That's right. Isn't this too much of a coincidence? Thankfully, Leonard just mentioned that there was no indication of hidden factions of mysterious powers at play from the preliminary investigations of Elliot's kidnapping. It was solely a crime motivated by money. Otherwise, I would really suspect if someone had deliberately arranged for this to happen. Klein found the situation rather curious. It was too coincidental. Dunn did not express his ideas as he was in deep thought. Likewise, corpse collector Fry maintained his silence in his black trench coat. Only when the carriage stopped at the building mentioned by Klein was the silence broken. Let's go up. Klein, you and old Neil walk behind. Be careful, very careful. Dunn got off the carriage and pulled out a strange revolver with a clearly long and thick barrel. He stuffed it into his right pocket. All right. Klein did not dare take point. After Leonard found someone to watch the carriage, the five Beyonders walked orderly into the building. With very light footsteps, they arrived at the third floor. Is this the place? Leonard pointed at the apartment opposite the kidnappers. Klein tapped his glabella twice and activated his spirit vision. In this state, his spiritual perception was enhanced again. He found the door familiar as if he had once entered it before. Yes. He nodded in affirmation. Old Neil also activated his spiritual perception, and after observing carefully, he said, There's no one inside, nor are there any spiritual glows of magic. Corpse collector Fry added with his hoarse voice, There aren't any evil spirits. He could see many spiritual bodies, including evil spirits and restless wraiths, even without activating his spirit vision. Leonard took a step forward and, like yesterday, punched the door's lock. This time not only did the surrounding wood shatter, even the door lock flew and fell noisily to the ground. Klein seemed to feel an invisible seal instantly vanish. Immediately following that, he caught a whiff of an intense stench. Corpse, a rotting corpse, Fry described coldly. He did not appear to suffer from nausea. Dunn reached out his black-gloved right hand and pushed open the door slowly. The first thing that they saw was a chimney. For early July, there was an abnormal heat emanating the room. In front of the chimney was a rocking chair. Sitting on it was an old woman dressed in black and white. Her head hung low. Her body was abnormally large. Her skin was blackish green and swollen. It felt like she would explode from a simple prod, spewing a foul, rotting stench from within. As maggots and other parasites squirmed between her flesh, blood, and rotting juices, or clothes and wrinkles, they appeared like points of light in spirit vision. They seemed to cling close to an extinguished darkness. Pa! Pa! The old woman's eyeballs dropped to the floor and rolled a few times, leaving behind a yellowish-brown streak. Klein felt disgusted, and being unable to tolerate the putrid stench any longer, he bent over and puked.